Hi, this is Robert Lundeen. We're recording this on July 2nd, 2017, and I hope that all of you are enjoying a great Independence Day weekend. It's been a busy few days here on the campaign. We had our summer campaign kickoff event on Thursday, and then on Friday we had our first big campaign finance deadline, and I want to specifically thank all of the volunteers and supporters that made both of those milestones such a success. I could not be prouder of both the turnout and the energy at our kickoff, as well as the breadth and depth of financial support that folks from across the city and beyond have shown for our campaign. But I really wanted to reach out to y'all by video today because in the midst of those big events, I never got the chance to share some thoughts related to the most recent budget meeting. For those of you that may not be familiar, the board met last Thursday, starting at 4 p.m. and lasting until about 1 in the morning to deliberate on the district's budget. And that's no small feat. Our district has 20,000 employees, 200,000 kids, and roughly $2 billion in spending. But the reaction to the way that that board meeting was handled was pretty swift, and it was pretty universal, that it demonstrated a level of dysfunction among the way that our board, and by extension the district, is operating, that leaders need to be addressing. And most recently, that's been brought forward to people's attention by Jasmine Jenkins of the organization called Houstonians for Great Public Schools, in an article that she wrote in the Houston Chronicle yesterday entitled, let me get this in here, What Ails Houston H.I.S.D isn't just about money. And if you read it, you'll see that what Jasmine talks about, it's terrific editorial, is that it's not just about getting resources into schools, but that it's about the way that the board operates together as a team of 9, developing a unified strategy. The board has one job. It's not to hire people other than a superintendent. It's not to look at the minutia of the way that schools operate. It is instead to, 1, be the superintendent's boss, and 2, set the overarching strategy as a team of 9 that folks across the district know they can follow. And what this last board meeting demonstrated is we've got a heck of a lot of work to do in building a board that not only is unified as a team, but that also has a clear strategy that they can articulate and then translate into policy. What I consistently ended up seeing and thinking in the course of that meeting, and I stayed until the bitter end, I left the parking lot at 1 a.m., is it reminded me of a book that I've read and that I've shared with the teams that I've managed, a great book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a really short book, nothing particularly weighty. It's a leadership fable, and it tells the story of a manager who comes into a new organization and quickly realizes that their problem isn't that they lack the right tools or the right resources, but that instead the people at the top aren't unified as a group and operating as a healthy team. And she works with them to identify what it's going to take to make them work, and in some cases acknowledging where the barriers are, where that team is not going to work. And in the book, they put together 5 elements that they say are crucial to a team. And I'm going to be bringing these up in the course of this campaign and asking how individual trustees and how the district as a whole is fostering that in the way that we set policy. The meeting this last week showed that in each of these 5 areas, we've got a lot of improvement to make. And the victims of that aren't necessarily the people sitting at that dais, but it's principals, it's teachers, it's people who didn't know what their salaries were going to be until they woke up the next morning in the Chronicle. And by extension, it's kids who are in the crosshairs of a group of 9 people and a superintendent who can't come to a shared agreement about how they want to operate and what's important. So you see here in this pyramid on the bottom, the most important is absence of trust. And for those of you that got the summary of the meeting, you'll know that there was a lot of fireworks there. The decision was made by the board president that in addition to mulling over a nearly $2 billion budget, that there would be some surprise motions put in at the last minute related to videotaping of by other board members. And on the fly, different board members were improvising different motions that affected literally tens of millions of dollars in spending. Some may say, well, those motions made sense or they didn't. My question would be, how much of the fact that they were put out there by surprise, that board members didn't even know that that was coming, came from an absence of trust? And what I would argue is, if you don't have a board that can demonstrate that even if they don't agree with each other, even if they're not best friends, that they can operate from a place of shared understanding and trust. What I would argue is, we don't have that right now, and governance on our board is suffering because of it. The next element that they bring up in the book is fear of conflict. Now, those of you that have ever been to one of our board meetings will say, no, I've seen plenty of conflict. And it's true, you have. You've seen argument, and you've seen the different personalities come out and clash over specific statements or rhetoric. But I would argue that real conflict when it comes to governance isn't about personalities, and it isn't about people's personal stories, but it's about policy and digging into the bigger topics that are going to affect the 200,000 kids in this district. And what I would argue there is we are afraid of that conflict. When it comes to the real issues that people refer to that may affect the long-term future of this district, are we going to continue to operate in a decentralized way? Are we truly offering equity? Are we ensuring that our schools and our district has a coherent vision? We don't really dive into those topics. Instead, we refer to them and then we run away from them. And the fact that our board and our superintendent, having been together as a group for nearly a year, are still in fundamental disagreement about the core principles in which they're going to operate shows that constructive conflict is an area where we're not embracing that to the right way. And does that mean I want to see a board that argues all the time? Absolutely not. But I do think we need a board and board leadership where we're unafraid to put forward our ideas without worrying about the reaction and having confidence in those convictions. And I think what we saw at the meeting last week is we're not there yet. Third is lack of commitment. And there again, we saw some serious issues at the last meeting. Board members openly acknowledging the fact that motions that had been put forward for them in previous days, they hadn't even had the chance to read. And coming up with tens of millions of dollars of budget changes on the fly. Lack of preparation equals lack of commitment. And lack of commitment equals lack of thoughtfulness in the way that we make policy. And so commitment matters. You want somebody who is going to come to that meeting completely prepared, having dived into every one of the documents and pieces of information needed to make smart policy. Fourth is avoidance of accountability. So I would argue that if we have an ongoing debate between our board and our superintendent over who's responsible for the fact that we went through 16 budget iterations, or that we had to approve a budget in the middle of the night, that is an avoidance of accountability, because both the board and the superintendent need to own it, embrace it, and then put forward a vision for how that's going to be improved in the future. Pointing fingers does nothing for kids. And lastly is inattention to results. Again, we saw a lot of that in the course of this last budget meeting. And I mean this with no malice towards the 9 board members or the superintendent. But the way that this budget process occurred literally led longtime district employees, heads of our labor organizations, vocal citizens, to speak up at 11 o'clock at night and say, we're disgusted by the way that this has gone down. We feel let down. We feel like we haven't been taken seriously. That's an inattention to results. And it requires board members that recognize that what they do on that dais is going to be scrutinized and noticed, and that the results and the process matter. So, based on this framework, and these 5 dysfunctions of a team, whoever comes in to this board in the year ahead, from whatever trustee district, is going to need to be ready to tackle not just big issues of policy, but the way that that team functions and being open about where their dysfunctions are and how they're going to build a strong team together. I would leave you with one last thought when it came to reactions from this last board meeting. And it's what I call the why should I care test. When I started as a 5th grade teacher in H.I.S.D. 17 years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know. But I did recognize that I needed to demonstrate relevance in everything that I did for my students. And so I created what I called the why should I care test, where at any time that I was teaching, if a student asked the question, why should I care about this? And I couldn't answer it, the lesson stopped. Because I hadn't proven to them that I was teaching on their behalf in a way that was meaningful. I think we need a why should I care test for the board, but specifically related to how does this policy or this debate affect kids? We went 8 hours in this last budget meeting, and I would argue that the amount of references to specifically how policy affect kids was far less than the debate about adults. The school district is designed fundamentally to enrich and serve the needs of our students. And if our trustees aren't comfortable anchoring both their decisions and their rhetoric on what's best for kids, then we need to fundamentally examine our belief systems as well as the way that we operate as a district. So yeah, these are some of the big ideas that I'm grappling with and that I'll be glad to share with you in the weeks and months ahead in the course of this campaign. Governance matters, and our board needs to demonstrate that it's operating from a good governance model in all that it does. Thanks for listening and watching today, and I wish you and your families the happiest of Independence Days. Take care.